Hello everyone, this is Niall from windowsnoob.com, and today I want to talk a bit about MBAM or Bitlocker Management within Microsoft Endpoint Manager Configuration Manager version 1910. The MBAM integration was previously released in technical preview versions of Configuration Manager, but now it's available in the current branch release, and you can test it for yourself. I'd recommend you test it in a lab before implementing this in production. So, testing it in the lab. Well, in order to do that, you're going to need a reasonably powerful computer. I'm lucky enough to have got a Lenovo P1 to power my lab from Joe at Lenovo. Here's the box it came in, and here are the specs. This is a fantastic machine. It's brilliant. I run all my labs on it, have done so for the last year. And yeah, it's also beautiful. Okay, so let's get to it. Let's have a look at some of the virtual machines within this lab. It's running Hyper-V, and as you can see, I've got these virtual machines with _CB at the end, and each one of them is my current branch, this particular current branch lab. I have many other labs, but this particular one is the one we're going to use for today's video. It's made up of an Active Directory domain controller, the configuration manager server itself, running 1906, not 1910. We'll do the upgrade here. We also have an issuing CA for PKI. We have a smooth wall for firewall activities. We have a web server, also needed for PKI. And we have some Windows 10 virtual machines as well. And you can see even the root CA is there, but it's powered off because we don't need it at this point. So that is one of the requirements of MBAM integrated with Endpoint Manager Configuration Manager version 1910, in that you need to have PKI enabled or HTTPS. So we can look at that briefly. Let's see. If we look at some of the site roles, you can see that, for example, the distribution point, management point, and so on, they're all set up for HTTPS, as you can see, right? And it might sound complicated, and you might start getting, oh no, I can't deal with this. I'll never touch MBAM. It's too difficult for me to set up PKI and then MBAM. Don't worry, it's not that difficult. So what I've done is I've prepared a bunch of guides, 10 actually. It sounds like a lot, but you can go through it in a few hours. I guarantee it. If you follow them step by step, you'll have your SCCM lab converted to HTTPS, and you'll be able to test the new MBAM functionality. So where can you get those guides? Well, head over to windowsnoob.com and search for the PKI configuration guides. That goes in 8 parts, as you can see here. And once you've done all of those 8 parts, there is a link at the bottom of that guide, which will give you 2 more parts, and that is actually configuring SCCM, or now Endpoint Manager Configuration Manager with PKI, and it's 2 parts. All right, so 8 to set up PKI in your lab, followed by 2 to convert Configuration Manager from HTTP to HTTPS. All right, so those are the guides that you'll need to prepare 1906 or 1910 before you start playing with MBAM. Okay, so now that you're aware of the requirements, let's take a quick look at the lab and see what we have. So if we go back to updates and servicing, you'll see I've already downloaded the 1910 update, and I did that by running this PowerShell script. It's the FastRing PowerShell script. FastRing is the first 2 weeks or so after an update pack is released. If you want to get it to show up in your console, you need to run the FastRing script, point out your CM server, and it'll do the rest. Once it's done that, you just click on check for updates. It'll automatically download the update pack, and then you can get installing. But remember, this is a lab. Test everything in a lab before doing it in production. So I'm not going to bore you with the upgrade process, but I will show you something that's important, and that's this. As you can see, there is a feature there called Bitlocker Management, and we need to click on that in order to get the MBAM integration. So click on Next. We'll just continue through the wizard until we're done. And off it goes. And if you've dealt with Configuration Manager for a long time, you'll know that there's a bunch of logs you need to be looking at, such as cmupdate.log and dmpdownloader.log and hman.log. There's loads of logs. That's the beauty of Configuration Manager. You'll always have logs. All right, so off it goes. It's going to upgrade. What I'm going to do is I will come back to this server after the upgrade is finished. So we'll just skip ahead and then we'll continue looking at MBAM. But before we do so, let's just take a quick look at some of the PKI stuff, just so that you're aware of, how to verify things are okay. So I'm logging on to the issuing CA, and what we can see here is our PKI view MMC application. And if you click on this, everything looks fine and dandy. And you can right click on that and choose refresh to verify that everything is okay. And as you can see, as far as PKI is concerned, things are good. All right, so we could check here also. And just to let you know, I actually followed the 10 parts that I referred to previously yesterday. So I configured all that yesterday in this particular lab, and I converted Configuration Manager from HTTP to HTTPS or PKI mode, because again, MBAM integration in version 19.10 requires working PKI. So one last thing we'll look at, and that is a client. So we'll log on to the client, and this client has the Configuration Manager client installed on it. I think it should have. So if we go in there and click on System and Security, scroll down a bit, there's the Config Manager client, and this was also upgraded. So as you can see, the client itself is in PKI mode, and this is exactly what we need. All right. So this is the 1906 version of Config Manager Client Agent. We'll upgrade this before we do any MBAM activities on this virtual machine. So I'll come back to you in a few minutes. Once the upgrade has completed, and then we'll get on with the rest of this video. Thanks. Okay, welcome back. The upgrade is now complete, and as you can see, the Config Manager server is upgraded to version 19.10. And if we check on the client, I've installed the updated client version. I've just upgraded it. And remember, we need PKI enabled for this to work. Also, let's just take a look. This is a VM, so things are going to behave differently to a real computer, but as you can see, it's not BitLockered. Anything else to see here? Some configurations, but nothing related to MBAM. So we'll go back to Config Manager and we'll take a look actually at IIS on the Config Manager server. And as you can see, there's a bunch of applications running under the default website. And if we refresh that, refresh it here, it stays the same. You don't see anything MBAM specific listed here, not yet, because that doesn't get installed until we go ahead and create our first MBAM policy. So let's go ahead and do that and then see what happens. So in the Config Manager console, go to Assets and Compliance and expand Endpoint Protection. And there you can see the new Bitlocker Management. And at the moment it's empty because we haven't created any policy yet. So just right click on it or click in the ribbon and choose Create Bitlocker Management Client Policy, Control Policy, and we'll give it a name. MBAM finally in 1910. Okay, and we'll select the two options below, and we're going to go through the various options here. So the first one I think is pretty much related to Windows 7 and Windows 8, but we only care about Windows 10. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the default encryption algorithm from 128-bit to 256 for the three of these things, and you'll see why soon enough. So 256-bit for the three encryption algorithms. And under client management, we're going to set it to enabled. And here's an important thing. You'll see select BitLocker recovery information to store. And if you hover over the red exclamation mark, you'll see it says plain text storage of recovery information required when the BitLocker Management encryption certificate has not yet been deployed. So what does that mean exactly? Well, what it means is if you do not deploy this BitLocker Management encryption certificate on your SQL server, then you have to select this option, right? So what is the BitLocker Management Certificate all about? Well, if you go back to, if you go to niallbrady.com, which I've done for you, and you select the following link, that is want to learn about MBAM integrated with Microsoft Endpoint Manager Configuration Manager, click on that. And that link will give you a bunch of guides which I've written, which are these ones here. Please look at them all. So it explains how to do key rotation, self-service, and so on. But underneath you've got what's new in 1910, and that's the version we've just installed or upgraded to, and how to plan and deploy your BitLocker management. But the one that you'll be interested in relation to that little exclamation mark is this one called Encrypt Recovery Data. So if you look at that particular link, what it explains is why you're doing this and the effect it can have on performance. So, think before doing this and test it in your lab, of course. And it gives you the certificate requirements for this BitLocker Management _cert. That's what it must be named. And in addition to that, there are 4 example scripts, one for creating the certificate, another for backing it up, another one for restoring it, and I think the last one is for verifying it. So you just have to modify a few little things in there, such as database name and so on. So make sure to have a look at that if you're interested at all in what this means. So I hope that has explained it to you. If you don't go and bother with these BitLocker Management Encryption Certificate, if you don't do it, then you must select this. And then the next time you create a BitLocker management control policy, this will be grayed out and you can't deselect it. But at that point, you can still go into the database and run one of those scripts to create the BitLocker Management Certificate, and all keys, recovery keys that are stored after that point will be encrypted with that certificate. Okay, so let's just change this to 1 minute because it's a lab. And let's configure this also. Nothing amazing there. And we'll click next. So as soon as you've done that, some magic will be happening in the background on your configuration manager server. One of the things that will happen is the MBAM application, I guess you could call it, should appear around here. So let's refresh this and see what happens. And as you can see, it magically has not appeared yet. Fantastic. So while we're waiting for that, we can actually open up a log called mpcontrol.log. And that log file will give you information about the installation, there we go, of the MBAM services within Configuration Manager. And if there's any problem with it getting installed, it will alert you here. So this is a good place to look to see that everything worked out. So if we go back to IIS, let's see, does it appear yet? It's not going to be instant. Ah, there it is. All right. So now we've got that component within IIS. We've got the MP control log telling us that everything looks fine and dandy. Let's see. It looks good. And now the next thing that we can do is go ahead and deploy the newly created policy. All right. So we'll go back into Config Manager here, and let's go and deploy that to our Windows 10 computers, of which I have one virtual machine ready to test with. So we'll deploy that policy. We're going to deploy it to all Windows 10. And this is just a lab, remember? Test everything in a lab. So I'm going to change the schedule for this to run every, let's say, 3 minutes. And that's checking for the compliance of this this policy. All right, so off it goes. Now what we need to do is go to our Windows 10 client, which is this one. If we look at configurations, you can see there's nothing new there. Well, let's refresh the policy. We'll do that like so. And if we also take a look in Control Panel and just look at installed applications, you can see that there's nothing MBAM related there yet, but it will come once it gets the policy. So let's try and speed it up again. And check, 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 check. Okay. I guess I should have verified that this oh, there it is. Boom. All right. So now it's got the MDOP MBAM client agent. And you can see the version number there. And that comes directly from the MBAM integration within Configuration Manager. So that is going to control policy on this Windows 10 computer. But one of the things that I have to point out is because this is a virtual machine and because I'm remoted into it, it will not pop up the MDOP client agent. So we're going to have to help it along the way just to get encryption started. We'll do that by kicking off a command, which is basically manage BD on C. Right? That will start encryption. And as you can see, encryption will start as soon as the computer is restarted. So let's do that. We'll restart it. Off we go. Now, if this virtual machine was not managed by Configuration Manager with MBAM integration, and we issued that command, then what you would see is that it would encrypt use-based only with AES 128-bit. That's basically all it would do, right? But because this computer is MBAM managed, it should have got the policy which told it to use AES 256, right? So let's just have a look at how the MBAM encryption is coming along. We do that with manage BD status. It shouldn't take too long, and off it goes. Encryption in progress, and look at that. There is the encryption method, the algorithm. As I said, it's 256, and it got that setting from the MBAM client, and we can actually view the settings that it has got under this registry key here. Policies, Microsoft, FVE, and in there you can see all the settings that MBAM has configured, including the key recovery service endpoint, and that actually is the management point that we have, and the web service right there, SMS MP MBAM, and that was the little application we saw getting installed in IIS. And as you can see, it's on port 443, which is HTTPS, right? So that is a requirement to get this working. Now, there are two things to point out on this client while we're waiting for it to encrypt, is that there are two logs you can look at in relation to MBAM, and they are these two here, Bitlocker Management Group Policy Handler, If we scroll to the end of that, we don't see what I want to see just yet, but we will, because eventually what it will say is found something like found management point or whatever, but basically it's telling us that everything is good. And if we look at the other one, what do we have here? It's giving us information about actually installing. Oh, here we go. Sorry, it's in this log. Found current management point CMO1. So if you hadn't got HTTPS configured, it would complain about it in here, and you would know that, okay, I need to convert to PKI. So those two logs, keep them in mind in terms of troubleshooting when things are happening or not happening on your config manager client agent. And another thing to check is the config manager client agent itself. We'll check that out. If we look here, and if we go to configurations, now what we should see is, yes, there it is. So we've got the policy that we configured in config manager, and at the moment it's non-compliant according to this, and that's probably because it's still encrypting. So let's check the status. The status is now at 96.4%, which means it's going to be done any second now. Okay, let's rush it along, 96.8. So basically, once it reaches 100%, we can then actually refresh this and evaluate it, and hopefully it will go from a non-compliant state to compliant, and that will be reflected eventually in the configuration manager console if you look at the deployment of your policy and then just look at the status of it, summarization. So let's just check, are we at 100% yet? 98.3, of course. Okay, so while we're waiting for that, we can go back to config manager here and look in SQL, and just a little thing to keep an eye on, and that is your database itself. And if you go to tables and scroll right down to recovery, dbo.recovery, that should be here, yes. So all of these ones here that I'm highlighting with my mouse, they're all related to MBAM Bitlocker Management. And for example, this one here, if we were to run a query on it like this, would list the obfuscated recovery keys of all your Bitlocker managed computers. There are stored procedures within the database that you can utilize to decrypt that. I'm not going to go in any further than that, but just to say that you can keep that in mind. Okay, so let's go back to the client. It should be at 100% now, and it is 100%. So if we look at the configuration manager client agent and now do a refresh, still says non-compliant, but let's click on evaluate and then refresh. And look at that, it has changed over to compliant. So you could click on view report to get information about, well, okay, what's it compliant with? And it's compliant with our policy, of course, right? So now if we go back to the config manager console here, and here is our policy that we configured, and we click on deployments, and here you can check your compliance. At the moment it has 0% compliance, but what we could do is run a summarization of that. So we'll click on view status, and actually right like that, it is already compliant. And here is our computer. All right, we click on more details, compliant, and you've got some information about the policy itself. Okay, so this is all good news. Now, what I did notice in my earlier testing of this is that the key, the recovery key, isn't stored in the database immediately, so don't be surprised if when you're testing this and you run a query like this, you don't see the keys appearing immediately. You can speed them up with some registry hacks. I'm not going to do that here, but you can trust me that the key or the keys will appear here, and you'll get the information that you need, for example, machines and stuff, if you like looking in SQL. So this is the section of SQL that the information will be stored. Yeah, and if you want to look into how key rotation works, self-service, or the help desk, please refer back to that blog post I wrote, which is want to learn about MBAM, because here I've got a getting started video. How does key rotation work? How you can use the self-service feature, the help desk feature, a look at reporting, because there's a bunch of new reports related to MBAM, and how you can get the recovery keys from the config manager database, and also how to deal with an error such as this. But more importantly, you've got all the official docs from Microsoft, and they're really detailed, and they'll help you with planning and deploying MBAM within Configuration Manager. So let's just take one last look here and see, did our key appear magically? And it didn't. Okay, of course not. But it will. It will appear there, and everything will be fine and dandy, and we'll be happy. But before we do that, we can look at reports very quickly. And the reports in relation to Bitlocker Management are in the Bitlocker Management node. You can go ahead and run them and get detailed information, which I've already blogged about in terms of, okay, what state is Bitlocker in my organization. Okay, so I hope that this guide or this video has given you a good overview of MBAM built in as a new feature within Configuration Manager version 1910. Thanks for looking at it. Cheers, bye.